Outside the besieged Kamal Adwan hospital, an Israeli tank. From inside, the sound of fierce gunfire. In the courtyard, there's panic and smoke. Terrified patients and their relatives are ordered by Israeli soldiers to leave the building. A few dozen had been evacuated by the World Health Organization just a few hours earlier. The hundreds of others remaining are told to line up in the courtyard, men and women separated, some holding white flags. A local journalist shared these images with Channel 4 News, filmed before he and others were detained. At the hospital's gate, its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. This is the last anyone has seen of him. Here he was earlier this week, issuing a desperate plea for help as Israeli forces intensified their assault in northern Gaza. Israel today said it had intelligence about militants in the area around the hospital. Photographs show a large number of Palestinian men taken from the hospital for interrogation, stripped to their underwear, their hands bound. Amongst those held, Abid, the journalist who filmed the footage you saw earlier. He's since been released.
From between 4 and 6 in the morning, the Israelis intensely bombed the area around the hospital. Then they ordered us, more than 300 people, into the courtyard. The humiliation and the violence was suffered by all of us, patients and displaced people. They forced us to strip to our underwear and surrounded us with tanks. The horror and fear we endured. When we arrived at the detention site, I was beaten by 3 soldiers, kicking me violently in the legs and stomach whilst my hands were tied.
The Israeli military says it's launched a renewed offensive in northern Gaza because militants have regrouped in the area. 3 soldiers were killed today. But the scale of the assault is reported to have concerned even some within the Israeli security establishment. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have fled northern Gaza in recent weeks. Many fear Israel is implementing the so-called General's Plan, a proposal to effectively starve out the civilian population if they've not already left, treating anyone remaining as an enemy combatant. The government denies it's adopted the policy, but Western allies have criticised it for blocking the entry of aid to the north. The bloodshed in Gaza knows no boundaries. This was Khan Younis in the south today. 38 people killed in an Israeli strike. There are attempts to restart talks on a ceasefire, but few have faith the suffering here will end any time soon.
We contacted the IDF for a response to Secunder Kermani's report. They told us that their forces are operating around the Kamal Adwan hospital based on intelligence regarding the presence of terrorists and terrorist infrastructure. They also said that in the weeks preceding the operation, the IDF facilitated the evacuation of patients from the area. Well, I'm now joined by the man behind the so-called General's Plan mentioned in Secunder's report, retired Major General Giora Iland, who served in the IDF for 33 years and led the Israeli National Security Council until 2006. The Israeli government does not say it is following your plan, but would you agree its actions are looking remarkably similar?
No, not at all. It is important to understand what is happening in Gaza right now. And in very, very short sentences, let me say 3 things. First, what is the situation? Number 2, what is the goal of my plan? And number 3, in what way it is different from what is really happening now.
Well, can we just go to number 3? Let's just go to the facts of how your plan differs from what's going on.
No. Well, if we jump, even if we try to skip the first matter, which is what is really happening in Gaza, we have to understand that after 1 year, there are still 101 Israeli hostages in Gaza that we failed to rescue. And the rationale behind my plan is to try to create a pressure that might give the last chance to rescue these people. Now, the conclusion is that we have to conquer the northern part of Gaza, something that we, for some reason, we did not do for the past 11 months, although we encircled this area since November last year. Now, there are two ways to try to conquer this area. One is to begin a ground operation, a large ground operation, and we, by doing so, while so many civilians are there, let's say one of the results, of course, one of the implications is that many civilians will be killed. I wanted to save it, so my plan is based on completely different concept, which is based on two phases. The very first phase is to evacuate all the civilians from this area, and then when it is empty from civilians, it will be easier either to fight against the remaining combatants or to create a very effective siege until they surrender. So this is my plan.
Yes.
I don't think that this is what is happening today, because the IDF began the ground operation long before they actually evacuated the population. And I think that it was not necessarily the best way to achieve the goal.
Of course, as you know, the argument is whether an evacuation, as described by you, is in fact a forced displacement of people. And the condition that requires it not to be an illegal forced displacement is that those people can go back, and that there is an undertaking for them to go back to their homes as soon as possible. Do you agree that that's what should happen? Because there are Israeli settlers just outside Gaza waiting to go in there and set up homes.
Is not supposed to be. No, the evacuation is not supposed to be permanent. The evacuation has only one reason, and this is to create conditions where we will be easier for us to fight against the combatants in much more harsh ways. And I say more than that, and I repeat and say it again and again and again, including, of course, in the Israeli media and not only. I am advocating for a complete end of the war today. I'm ready to end the war in Gaza today and to withdraw all the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip today, only on one condition, and this is a full return of all the Israeli 100 hostages. If such a thing is possible, I will be for that, and I will give up any other efforts. Yeah. Unfortunately, it is probably not attainable. And it is not attainable. You did not let me explain what is the situation in Gaza.
It's also not agreed by Mr. Netanyahu.
No, just let me finish the sentence, because Hamas, although militarily speaking, they have been defeated from the political, civilian, economic point of view. They maintain the regime because they're controlling the supply, and they deliver the supply to the people. It makes them stronger and stronger and richer every day, because they get the supply for free and they resell it for very high prices. And as long as this is the situation, the leadership of Hamas, whoever is the leadership today, does not have any incentive to release the Israeli hostages.
But your plan also relies on your ability, or Israel's ability, to redesignate civilians who are unable or unwilling to leave northern Gaza. They may be injured, they may be unable to travel, they may be old and insecure, they may be being prevented by from leaving by Hamas itself. You would redesignate all of them as enemy combatants, and that there is no provision in law for you to redefine civilians as fighters when they are civilians who are just refusing to leave or unable to leave.
Okay. You make some assumptions and you make accusations based on this false assumption. There are 40,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza. Their job is to help the people there. They have hundreds of vehicles, ambulances, medical care people and others. And if there are some people who are either elderly or injured or whatever, they cannot walk, then they can help them. And we're speaking about a very short range of only 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers that they have to move in order to be in a safe area.
But you're talking about forcing people to evacuate, and people have the right not to. Would you leave your home if you were ordered to?
Look. Israel evacuated in the first phase of the war about 900,000 people from this area and saved their lives. And we did something similar in the southern part of Gaza, of the Gaza Strip, in the area of Rafah, when we evacuated about 800,000 people. And again, we saved their lives. There are only two options, either to fight in an area when there are mixture of population and combatants together, and everybody can understand the implications.
Yeah, but that is not a green light for you to kill everyone. The law is very clear that it has to be proportionate.
No, let me finish the sentence. Or to try to separate between the combatants and the population. and it is much more recommended to separate between these two. That's what we recommended, nothing more than that.
But this is why Jordan today is accusing Israel of ethnic cleansing, and they're not the only ones.
Everybody can expect. Everybody blames Israel for all the possible atrocities without any real basis. By the way, Israel is blamed by everyone.
Well, Israel doesn't let any investigators in.
No. But all the people who blame Israel are either politicians, lawyers, or journalists. You cannot find one Western general, whether it is British, American, or anyone else, who would say that what Israel does is not consistent with the law of the armed conflict, and it is by far much better conduct in ethics compared to what the British and the Americans did in Afghanistan or Iraq. You cannot find any general who would say different words than the words that I just said right now. And by the way, there was
no general will be allowed to enter into the political debate. But that's a separate question. Isn't the other question that faces your plan that Netanyahu doesn't agree with it?
Well, again, this is, let's say, professional debate about what should be done. As far as I know, the IDF did not adopt my plan, although it got some support from the military and some support from politicians. But again, I'm just a civilian today. And the real question is not whether my plan is good or bad. The real question is what are the alternatives? And I think that all other alternatives are worse for all reasonable purposes. And as I said in the beginning of our conversation, the real goal of this plan is to create a pressure that finally will push Hamas to release the Israeli hostages. And if we don't do it in a very short time, then these people will perish in miserable conditions in the tunnels of Gaza. And this is, by the way, a real violation of the humanitarian international law, and some people are trying to ignore it.
Giora Ilan, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. 7 Israeli citizens have gone on trial accused of spying for Iran. They're being charged with a range of security offences, including aiding an enemy during wartime. And a separate cell of 7 accused spies from East Jerusalem is due in court next week. From Haifa, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Porrick O'Brien reports.
Israel has a spy problem. According to prosecution, one of these Iranian spy cells operate out of Haifa, Israel's 3rd biggest city, for over 2 years, including during the war. Iranian handlers sent them coordinates for secret military bases. They traveled the length and breadth of Israel on 600 missions, taking thousands of photos and video of secret military sites. Several of those sites subsequently hit, like this army base in northern Israel, where 4 soldiers were killed last week. According to the indictment, one of the defendants became involved at the age of just 15, a teenage spy. In the last few weeks, the police and the internal security services here, Shin Bet, have arrested a total of 18 people suspected of spying for Iran. They constitute 2 specific spy rings. First, a group of Israeli Jews that emigrated from Azerbaijan about 10 years ago. They are appearing in court here in Haifa today. As we're speaking, by the way, the Israeli air defense system is obviously taking out Hezbollah rockets as we speak, which sort of underlines, I suppose, the international nature of so much of the conflict here. But back to the spies. If you have envisaged a sort of Iranian James Bond, think again. These people come from the margins of Israeli society. It was appear their primary motivation was greed, we think. They were paid hundreds of thousands of shekels in digital Russian currency. The defendants appeared via video link from prison. The man on the left, 20-year-old Yigal Nassan. His father, according to prosecution, the cell's leader. The others hiding from camera. The charges aiding the enemy during the course of a war, providing information to the enemy. Court-appointed defense lawyers read the indictment in real time.
It is all a little more freestyle in the Israeli courts. The indictments have arrived on the desks of the lawyers representing these defendants. What gives this case, of course, extra traction is it is happening against the backdrop of conflict, of possible war between Israel and Iran. The maximum sentence these people could get is death.
Although some in the Israeli cabinet are calling for that, it's very unlikely to happen. In reality, the state prosecution is looking for life sentences. The defense still processing this historic indictment.
We have to copy the investigation material and then we will give our arguments on court.
I see. How young is the youngest defendant?
16 years old, I think. Yeah.
The cast list. Teenage spies. Another cell on trial next week. Foot soldiers, according to prosecution, in a possible war between Israel and Iran. Paranoia is a weapon too.